David Clark, welcome to Money Talks,
Thank you, Ziad.
Financial Policy Council podcast.
Pleasure to be.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
David, you've been a member of the Project Liberty team for the last 6 months now, 6 to 9 months.
Yep.
We're glad to have you on board. You basically are in the private jet aviation industry.
Correct.
You cater to the very wealthy, to the people who don't have time, people who want to meet deadlines, people who are always on the go. What led you to go in the aviation industry or the private jet aviation?
Well, it's something I always was interested in as a kid growing up. My dad was a pilot, and when I went to university, I decided to go to the very best aviation university in the world, Embry-Riddle, and that's where I, got my flight ratings, my degree in aviation, and then just embarked on a career since then. And I've been able to do a number of things, but I've always gravitated towards this side of the industry, which is the private jet market, both from an operations standpoint, now from a transaction standpoint.
What do you like most in your industry?
The people that I get to deal with. I mean, the clients that I have are literally the smartest people in the world, and I learn from them.
Because they've made it big time.
They've made it. They've accomplished. They're at the peak of their success. They're at the peak of. They're at the top of their game. Even just by observing them, you can learn things. And I think that's the thing that I like the most is the quality of people that I get to deal with.
That's awesome. So, how does private aviation lend to enhancing the fight back to a more capitalistic movement or society?
Well, it has everything to do with it because private aviation is the ultimate expression of freedom. It is the ultimate capitalist tool. It is really the only way to go when you want, where you want, as an expression of the entrepreneurial spirit. It's no surprise that because that's built into our DNA in the United States, we have the largest fleet of private jets in the world, 14,000 jets based in the United States. The second largest fleet of aircraft is a very distant second. That's
where?
In Brazil. They got about 800 jets, and Mexico has about 750. So you look at countries that have developed and that are light years ahead of everybody else, like the United States, partly because of our geographic size, but also because of our entrepreneurial spirit in our capitalistic society. It goes hand in hand with private aviation. So we have a well-developed airline transportation system, which takes large numbers of people, and we are safely taking millions and millions of people on the airlines. But we also have a parallel transportation system, which is the private aviation system, and that allows companies, family offices, high net worth individuals to really maximize their time without sacrificing their personal lives with their families.
So what's the purpose of all this? What's your goal? What's the end game? I mean, you keep servicing these people, dealing with them, making money, I guess, but I think it's much more than that. I think you're a much smarter guy and you have a bigger purpose than serving people in the aviation industry. What's the end game?
Well, the end game for me is to is really to help help develop the entrepreneurial spirit, and this is my contribution to that.
So if you want to define David Clark in one word, what would you say David Clark is?
Focused.
Focused.
Yep, focused. And this is what I'm focused on. I'm focused on...
It's your passion.
It is. It's something I'm passionate about. I lost my father at a young age, at the age of 18. It was an unexpected event, and one day he was with us, and one day he wasn't. And I'm not saying that right then and there I vowed to, help other successful people spend more time with their families, but it's kind of evolved into that. Because I haven't been able to spend time with my father, I want to make sure that other families get to. And so, it's a personal thing to me. It's not just a vocation, it's almost an avocation. It's both. So there's a lot of components to it. There's this side that I, want to be able to facilitate families spending more time together, which the private aircraft allows them to do. It allows them to build their businesses, serve on boards, do the things that they need to do to carry on the family legacy or the company legacy, and at the same time not sacrifice time at home. That's really important to me. But there's the other side to me, which really wants to, see a return and a furtherance of the capitalistic spirit, because that is the greatest system that has developed over time to bring people out of poverty and by creating true wealth. And a private aircraft does that. A private aviation program does that because it allows people to leverage the only non-renewable resource that they have, which is their time. It's really, really important. So when you have a private aircraft, you are managing your time to the very best ability that you can.
So let's talk a bit about the commercial aviation.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on the commercial aviation and the impact on the economy, given the times we're living?
Well, I think it's one of the. I mean, there's several things, obviously, in a country or a society that are basically they're accelerators, right? And so, even the city that we're sitting in here, having one location with so many different companies and businesses and banks, that in itself is an accelerator. The proximity of companies to each other, the transportation system, the education system. So the airline system is an accelerator to the economy. The private aviation system is also an accelerator to the economy. It's almost like a chicken or the egg. What comes first? The entrepreneur that's going to visit a location to establish a new facility, and then that's going to drive thousands of jobs, because that's where the airlines come in then for the day-to-day and getting people to and from, and then that also leads to leisure travel. So all of these things work together, but they're two sides of the same coin. You've got the private aviation side, you've got the commercial side. But to answer your question specifically, the commercial aviation system in the United States is literally the safest way to travel. We have not had an accident in almost 14 years in this country. It is an extremely safe way to travel, and it's an accelerator. It's an accelerator for economic activity, and so it's extremely important that countries and societies have that in place, that freedom of movement, so that they can then they can promote business interests and the exchange of ideas and the creation of wealth.
Creation of wealth. What does it take to make fuck you money in the private aviation industry? Money, resources, networks, people, circumstances, regulation. What is the combination, the secret sauce of making really fuck you money? And if you want to do that, how much do you need to start with to have at least some kind of an impact?
You're talking about in the aviation industry itself?
Private aviation.
In the private aviation industry itself.
Exclusively.
The people that are doing really well in private aviation.
Like, for example, what's his name? The Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, both owns one of the largest and most reputable private aviation companies, as you know.
Correct.
So why do you think he got into this? Just to save for himself some money to travel? No, it's more than that. So there's some economics behind it, I guess, which he saw and which most people didn't see.
Well, Warren Buffett famously, I mean, he's had private aircraft all of his life.
Yeah.
And he famously had named his aircraft early on the Indefensible.
Really?
The Indefensible. When he began.
And why did he name it like this?
Because he thought it was ostentatious. He thought it was something he was, a little ashamed of.
Yeah, exactly. He's a guy of modest means. He lives in his house.
Drives his own car.
Yeah, yeah.
But the story goes that he went from calling it the Indefensible to calling it the Indispensable.
I see.
And that's where
things have changed.
That's how it switched, where he really realized, hey, I'm not getting any younger. And, I not only am I not getting younger, but I don't even know how much time I have left. It's like, and we all have that.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the human condition is
very interesting.
Is we don't know how much time we have left. It could be tomorrow. It could be 30 years from now.
Yeah.
So we're managing time that we don't even know how much exists. It's an incredible
That's a typical
concept.
example with Warren Buffett.
Right.
Why he went into that, and why would people go into that?
And so when he first got involved with NetJets,
NetJets, exactly.
NetJets, and started investing in that, he really began to see just how much it impacted people's lives. I think that that Warren Buffett, he obviously got involved for the financial reasons. He saw the capability of it, and truly, it's become just an incredible company. I mean, they have a fleet of well over 500 aircraft. I mean, it's larger than most airlines in the world. It's literally a private jet airline.
It's the largest private jet company. NetJet.
By far. Then he bought a secondary company called Flight Safety, which does all the training for the pilots. So now he gets to
Totally vertically integrated operation.
Total. And so that's just one example of now he owns that whole, cycle of, so all the pilots at NetJets obviously go to Flight Safety.
Yeah.
And, it feeds both sides of the house. But yeah, I mean, he obviously saw that. The other areas that are doing really well in private aviation are called maintenance and repair, basically, shops that do installations.
Yeah.
That's making incredible amounts of money. Installations, things like, Wi-Fi systems, other kinds of in-flight entertainment, those types of things are doing really well, as well as the manufacturers themselves. I mean, they're having record years with this whole growth that's come out of COVID, where people flocked to private aviation to get around because the airlines had basically shut down. We're still living it's slowing down a little bit, but we're still living that increase that uptick in demand from COVID.
I'm sure you're aware the FBC is pretty much fighting for financial freedom, wealth creation, all that kind of stuff. In your opinion, how do you think private aviation is a factor in this?
Well, I think it has everything to do with it has to do with two things. For a society to truly develop, you've got to have, at the most basic level, you have to have two things. You have to have freedom of speech, and you have to have freedom of movement. On the other hand,
I love it. Brilliant. You're absolutely right.
When societies try to restrict their populations, what do? They restrict speech, and they also restrict freedom of movement.
That's exactly what's happening today.
To control people. So if we're going to continue with our country as a bastion of freedom, as a beacon, as a city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan said, then we have to continue to promote freedom of speech and freedom of movement. And private aviation has everything to do with freedom of movement. Imagine yourself having a mode of transportation where if you have the resources, you can go anywhere at any time with the passengers of your choosing to be with you. You can go by yourself. You can invite your friends. You can invite your family. You can pick people up. You can drop people off. It is literally the modern day equivalent of the magic carpet. And it's an incredible way to get around. But it has everything to do with that freedom of movement, which is a requirement for a free society.
Brilliantly articulated. So over the last 10 years, what's the difference in growth between the commercial aviation industry and the private industry? Private aviation. The private aviation has been surpassing by far the commercial, or no, or not really?
Well, I mean, it's gone in phases, and they're not completely in sync at times.
Okay.
I mean, I think that obviously 9/11, if we go back to 9/11, even more than 10 years, let's go back 20 years.
20 years.
After 9/11, obviously that was a major, major impact that devastated the commercial airline industry. I mean, at the end of the day,
and this is where you saw really the growth or the beginning of the private aviation after 9/11.
You saw
people wanted freedom, people wanted movement,
Correct. And so in those
interesting.
Whereas the commercial airlines really suffered from a trust standpoint, the public really had a tough time trusting getting on a commercial airliner.
Yeah.
And that took several years to recover from that. The private aviation had somewhat of a boom after that event. That was cut short in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And it took a good number of years, probably 6 or 7 years after the financial crisis for the private aviation market to start to recover. It got hit during the initial period of COVID, just like
Yeah.
the commercial did.
Yeah.
But then where the commercial airlines took longer to recover from COVID, June of 2020, the private aviation market just took off like a rocket because so many people with resources said, we've got to get around.
Yep.
They were starting to live out of their vacation homes. They were starting to spend time in remote places, and they needed transportation. They needed mobility. And so this became a solution for them. And so we see ebbs and flows, and there's times in history where we see the private aviation market and the commercial aviation market growing at similar rates. Other times we see it completely out of
Depending
phase.
on circumstances, obviously, especially circumstances that restrict freedom of movement and freedom of speech.
Correct. And so while the airlines were restricted because of all the lockdowns and the travel restrictions and the a lot of things that were preventing people from moving around, by traveling privately, people could get around that. They could get around that. They could have their mobility back, and that's what they needed.
Fantastic. So going into 24, where do you see the economy? Where do you see the future? What do you see happening? How do you see the economy shaping up? And basically the aviation industry in general, given the tons of problems we're having, and especially not now with the emission of carbon and all that stuff. How will this affect the private aviation industry? All the ramifications.
Well, I think the economy is right now there's an appearance that things are going well, but there's also a lot of trepidation about what could happen, especially going into an election year next year.
What do you think would happen, David?
Well, if you start to lose investor confidence, then obviously there's going to be, and that translates into consumer confidence, that creates a spiral effect that leads us to bad places, right? Recession or worse, could happen. Doesn't look like that right now, but I think there's some structural issues with the economy that that could manifest themselves pretty quickly if we're not careful.
Do you see a recession coming this year or next year, 24?
I don't see it coming this year. Watching the people that I typically watch in order to be able to determine what's going to happen. There's not. I don't think there's a recession that's imminent on the horizon, like right now, immediately. But at some point there could be.
But I think with the caliber of people we deal with, recession or no recession,
correct,
they don't care.
No, they're
It
going to
doesn't
make
make any
money.
difference for them.
They're making money no matter what.
No matter what.
Yeah,
exactly.
They're diversified. To answer your question about sustainability and just how all this, this climate crisis, the sky is falling crowd, that is something that the private aviation industry has taken a leadership role on. They're way ahead of everybody else. Even the airlines, are taking private aviation.
I'm not surprised. These guys are the movers and shakers.
Yeah, and so private aviation as an industry has really embraced this and hasn't resisted it. Hasn't said, "Oh no, it's no big deal. These little airplanes don't pollute much."
Yeah.
We've embraced it and said, you know what, we're going to participate. We're going to do everything we can to help develop these new technologies like sustainable aviation fuel, which is essentially recycled cooking oil that you can put into an aircraft and it can fly just normally.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing thing. And there's more and more of that being developed every year in order for aircraft to burn. So private aviation has taken a real leadership role with that. There's new certifications coming out for flight departments. There's carbon credits that can be purchased to be able to offset if somebody wants to go that route. But you can literally now buy sustainable aviation fuel and put it in your aircraft. And private aviation is the side of the industry that's led that. And now the airlines are starting to follow. So, and with more volume, the price will come down.
So, David, since 2017, the number of people who were making $500,000 and more have grown up tremendously, exponentially. How did this affect the aviation industry?
Well, we've felt it directly even before COVID. So I'll talk about the period before COVID and now since COVID happened, because COVID was a defining event that really affected the private aviation industry.
So, excuse me to interrupt 1 second. Before that, do you think buying or leasing private planes is directly related to how much money you make, how much income you make? Or do people think that this is not a necessary expense, spending on private aviation?
Well, the addressable market, when you look at large companies like NetJets and other companies that have studied the market, and they look at the addressable market, which is in excess of 100,000 people with this kind of capability, they're only scratching the surface. I mean, they're only scratching the surface, maybe 5 to 10% penetration at this time.
Interesting.
So the vast majority of people are not doing this yet. They have the capability, they have the need, they just don't have the desire yet. So to be involved in private aviation, you have to have three things. You have to have capability. You have to have, obviously, a need to go somewhere, right? I mean, so you have to be on board. You have to have travel. You have to have vacation homes. You have to have business interests. But you also have to have the desire. You have to have the desire to do this. So when you have those three ingredients, then you're a candidate to be involved.
Observation.
So the addressable market is much larger than what's actually using it now. So there's a lot of room for growth. So when that period 17 to 20 to 2020, that's what fueled the growth of companies like NetJets, like VistaJet, like FlexJet, and hundreds of other charter operators. Aircraft were purchased in increasing numbers during that period. When COVID started, obviously everything came to a halt for everybody, right? Airlines, private aviation, everybody just kind of stopped in place, figured out what was going on. And then private aviation just took off. So a lot of those people that are part of that addressable market, they started taking a second look at this. Whereas before they said, you know what, I can't afford it, or I don't want to afford it. I don't want to do this. I'm just going to take the airlines, or I'm just going to stay home, or whatever. All of a sudden they said, you know what, this is something we need to do. And that's when they just flooded the market with demand. And we've been on this rocket ride ever since.
That's very insightful, David. You really know your stuff. I'm impressed.
It's what I do.
Glad to have you on board, my friend.
Thank you.